So yeah, I'm not scared of dying. I just don't want to die because I'm going to be a pawn for somebody else.
She's always nice to me. She was always loving. She's always there whenever I needed anything or anyone.
25-year-old Joana Rodriguez was found bound with duct tape in the trunk of a car just 4 days after giving birth to her son. She had suffocated in that cramped space while her newborn baby was taken by the woman who lived nearby, the woman who befriended her, the woman who had visited her in the hospital. Linda Anita Carty, a 42-year-old former schoolteacher from Street Kids, now sits on death row in Texas for orchestrating this crime. But Joana's story begins weeks before her murder, when Linda started showing up at her apartment with gifts and friendly conversation. Linda claimed she was pregnant too, even patting her stomach to make it look real. She told Joana they could be new mothers together. She offered to help with the baby. She gained Joana's trust with lies that would turn into a nightmare. On May 16, 2001, Linda arrived at Joana's Houston apartment with 3 men. What happened next was a kidnapping designed to steal a 4-day-old infant. Linda had spent months crafting this plan, telling everyone in her family that she was expecting. She had prepared a nursery. She had bought baby clothes. But there was no pregnancy. There never had been. Linda insists she was framed by drug dealers because she had previously worked as an informant. She's the only British woman on death row in America, and her case has drawn international attention from the UK government. But for Joana's family, the woman who stole their daughter's life and tried to steal her baby represents something far more personal than diplomatic disputes or appeals courts. This is a story of how a lie about pregnancy became a plan for murder, and how a teacher's desperate need for a child led to one of the most disturbing crimes in Houston's history. Linda Carty arrived in Houston in the 1980s with a teaching degree and big dreams. Born on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts, she had dual citizenship in both Britain and the United States. She spoke with a slight accent that made her sound educated, sophisticated. People trusted her voice, and Linda knew how to use that to her advantage. She settled into a modest apartment complex in Northwest Houston, the kind of place where young families lived paycheck to paycheck and everyone knew their neighbor's business. Linda fit right in. She was friendly, helpful, always ready with advice or a listening ear. She told people she had worked as a teacher back home, that she understood children, that she wanted to help. But Linda's life in Houston wasn't as stable as she made it appear. She struggled to find steady work. Her teaching credentials didn't transfer easily, and she found herself taking odd jobs to pay the bills. More troubling, she got involved with the wrong crowd. By the late 1990s, Linda had become entangled with drug dealers who operated throughout the city. What made Linda valuable to law enforcement was her clean appearance and her ability to blend in anywhere. She didn't look like a typical drug user or dealer. She looked like a teacher, which is exactly what made her perfect for undercover work. The DEA recruited her as an informant, and Linda began feeding information about drug operations to federal agents. For a while, this arrangement worked perfectly. Linda got paid for her information, and the DEA got access to criminals they couldn't reach through traditional methods. But informant work is dangerous business, and Linda was about to learn that betraying drug dealers comes with consequences she never expected. In early 2001, something changed in Linda's life. She started telling her family and neighbors that she was pregnant. At 42 years old, this would be a late-in-life surprise, but not impossible. Linda seemed excited about the prospect of motherhood. She talked about baby names, nursery decorations, all the things expectant mothers discuss. But there was a problem. Linda wasn't pregnant. She never had been. Instead, she had crafted an elaborate lie that she couldn't escape. She had told too many people, made too many promises, painted herself into a corner with her deception. And as the months passed, Linda realized she needed to find a way to produce a baby, or her entire fabricated world would collapse. Joana Rodriguez lived in the same apartment complex as Linda, just a few buildings away. At 20 years old, she was young, trusting, and genuinely pregnant with her first child. Joana worked at a local store to support herself and was looking forward to becoming a mother. She lived a quiet life, keeping to herself most of the time, which made her perfect for Linda's purposes. Linda began a careful campaign to befriend her young neighbor. She would stop by Joanna's apartment with small gifts, offer help with errands, and gradually insert herself into the pregnant woman's life. Linda presented herself as an older, more experienced woman who could guide Joanna through the challenges of pregnancy and motherhood. Joanna appreciated the attention. She didn't have much family nearby, and Linda seemed genuinely interested in helping. When Linda mentioned that she was also expecting, Joanna felt like she had found a friend who understood what she was going through. The two women began spending more time together, with Linda carefully building trust and learning Joanna's routines. Linda's plan was taking shape, but she needed help to execute it. She reached out to three men she knew from the drug world: Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlos Williams. These weren't sophisticated criminals, just street-level dealers who owed Linda favors or needed quick money. Linda told them she had a job that would pay well and wouldn't take long to complete. What she didn't tell them, at least not initially, was that the job involved kidnapping a baby from a young mother. Linda presented it as a simple robbery, something that would be over quickly with minimal risk. The men agreed to help, not fully understanding what they were signing up for. On May 12, 2001, Joanna gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Ray, and like any new mother, she was exhausted but overjoyed. Linda visited her in the hospital, bringing flowers and congratulations. She held the baby, cooed over him, and told Joanna what a beautiful child she had. Joanna felt lucky to have such a caring friend nearby. But Linda wasn't there as a friend. She was studying the baby, memorizing his features, and planning exactly how she would take him. In her mind, this child would solve all her problems. She would present him as her own son. The pregnancy she had been claiming for months would finally have its proof, and her lie would become reality. For days after Joanna brought baby Ray home from the hospital, Linda put her plan into motion. It was May 16, 2001, just after 10 p.m. when Linda arrived at Joanna's apartment with Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlos Williams. She had told the men this would be a simple break-in, that they would find drugs and money inside, and everyone would walk away richer. But when they knocked on Joanna's door, everything changed. Joanna answered, holding her infant son. She recognized Linda immediately and relaxed, thinking her neighbor had come for another friendly visit. That split second of trust cost her everything. The men pushed past her into the apartment, and Joanna realized this wasn't a social call. What happened next unfolded quickly and violently. The men bound Joanna with duct tape, covering her mouth and wrapping her wrists. Baby Ray started crying, a sound that filled the small apartment and seemed to drive everyone's panic higher. Joanna's eyes were wide with terror as she watched strangers handle her child. As she realized that whatever was happening, it centered around her son. Linda took control of the situation with a calmness that would later disturb everyone who heard the testimony. She directed the men to continue binding Joanna while she picked up the baby. Linda's demeanor changed completely when she held Ray. She spoke to him softly, almost lovingly, as if he were already hers. Gerald Anderson would later testify that Linda seemed to know exactly what she wanted. This was a robbery gone wrong, or a plan that had spiraled out of control. Linda had orchestrated every moment, and she moved through the apartment with purpose. She gathered baby supplies, formula, diapers, everything Ray would need. She was preparing to take him permanently. Joanna was still alive when they carried her outside. The men loaded her into the trunk of Linda's car, while Linda secured the baby in a car seat. Neighbors later said they heard nothing unusual that night. No screaming, no sound of struggle. Linda had planned this crime to be quiet, efficient, and unnoticed. As they drove through Houston's dark streets, Joanna was suffocating in the trunk. The duct tape over her mouth prevented her from breathing properly, and the cramped space made every breath a struggle. She had just given birth 4 days earlier. Her body was still recovering, still weak, and now she was fighting for her life in the back of a car driven by people she had trusted. Linda, meanwhile, sat in the front seat with baby Ray, already speaking to him as if he were her own child. She had crossed a line that most people couldn't imagine crossing. She had taken a mother's child and condemned that mother to die, all to maintain a lie about her own pregnancy. The drive lasted about 20 minutes. They stopped at a remote area where Linda made a decision that would define her crime. Instead of releasing Joana, instead of finding some way to let her live, Linda chose to leave her in the trunk. She took the baby and walked away, leaving Joana bound and suffocating. By the time someone found the car the next day, Joana Rodriguez was gone. The 20-year-old new mother had died alone, in darkness, probably calling out for her son through tape that no one could hear. Her death wasn't quick or easy. She had time to understand what was happening, time to realize she would never see Ray again, time to experience the full horror of what Linda Carty had done to her. Linda returned to her apartment that night with baby Ray and immediately began the performance of her life. She called her family members, breathless with excitement, telling them she had given birth. She showed off the baby to neighbors, accepting congratulations and gifts. For a few hours, Linda's lie had become her reality. But babies require documentation, and Linda's plans started falling apart almost immediately. She couldn't produce a birth certificate, hospital records, or any of the paperwork that accompanies a legitimate birth. When she tried to get medical care for Ray, doctors started asking questions she couldn't answer. More problematic was Joana's family. When the young mother didn't return phone calls or answer her door, relatives became concerned. They contacted police on May 17th, just one day after the kidnapping. Officers arrived at Joana's apartment to find signs of a struggle and a missing person with a newborn baby. The search for Joana Rodriguez began immediately, but it didn't take long to expand into a search for her infant son. Detectives canvassed the apartment complex, talking to neighbors and trying to piece together Joana's last known movements. That's when Linda's name first came up. Multiple neighbors mentioned the older woman who had befriended Joana, who claimed to be pregnant herself, who had been spending time with the young mother. When police knocked on Linda's door on May 18th, they found her caring for a baby boy who appeared to be only a few days old. Linda's story didn't hold up under basic questioning. She claimed the baby was hers, born at home with no medical assistance. But she couldn't explain inconsistencies in her timeline, couldn't produce any evidence of pregnancy, and couldn't account for her whereabouts on the night Joana disappeared. The discovery of Joana's body in the car trunk confirmed what investigators already suspected. This wasn't a custody dispute or a family matter gone wrong. This was kidnapping and murder, carried out with planning and purpose. Linda Carty had killed a young mother to steal her child. When police arrested Linda on May 19, 2001, they also picked up Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlos Williams. The three men immediately began cooperating with authorities, each providing details about the crime that Linda had carefully orchestrated. Their testimonies painted a picture of Linda as the mastermind behind the operation. She had approached each of them separately, recruited them for what she claimed was a simple burglary, and then directed their actions throughout the night of the kidnapping. None of the men had expected to be involved in murder, and all three quickly agreed to testify against Linda in exchange for lesser sentences. But Linda's defense team had a different story to tell. They claimed their client was innocent, framed by the three co-defendants who were the real criminals. Linda's lawyers argued that she had been targeted because of her work as a DEA informant, that drug dealers had orchestrated the crime and pinned it on her to silence her cooperation with law enforcement. The informant angle added complexity to the case. Linda had indeed worked with the DEA, providing information about drug operations in Houston. Her handlers confirmed that she had been a valuable source, giving them intelligence that led to several arrests. But federal agents also testified that Linda's informant work had ended months before Joana's murder, and there was no evidence that her former associates had framed her for this crime. The physical evidence was damning. Linda's fingerprints were found inside the car where Joana's body was discovered. Witnesses placed Linda at Joana's apartment complex on the night of the murder. Most importantly, Linda had been found in possession of baby Ray when police arrived at her door. The prosecution presented Linda's crime as a desperate attempt to maintain a lie that had gotten out of control. She had told so many people she was pregnant that she needed to produce a baby to maintain her story. When she couldn't get pregnant naturally, she decided to steal someone else's child, regardless of the cost of the baby's mother. Linda's defense continued to insist she was innocent, that the Rayall killers had framed her, But they couldn't explain away the physical evidence, the witness testimony, or Linda's possession of the victim's baby. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Linda Carty guilty of capital murder. The sentencing phase of Linda's trial focused on whether she should receive life in prison or the death penalty. Prosecutors argued that the crime was particularly heinous because it involved the murder of a young mother and the kidnapping of an infant. They painted Linda as a remorseless killer who had planned every aspect of the crime. Linda's defense team tried to present mitigating evidence, including her background as an educator and her work with law enforcement. But they struggled to overcome the brutality of the crime and Linda's apparent lack of remorse. On February 21st, 2002, Linda Carty was sentenced to death. The case took on international dimensions because Linda held British citizenship. The UK government opposes the death penalty in all cases and began diplomatic efforts to commute Linda's sentence to life in prison. British officials argued that executing Linda would violate international agreements between the two countries. Human rights organizations also took up Linda's cause, arguing that her trial had been unfair and that executing her would be unjust. They pointed to questions about her legal representation, claims of prosecutorial misconduct, and concerns about whether the death penalty was appropriate for someone with mental health issues. Linda's supporters continued to maintain her innocence, claiming she was framed by drug dealers in retaliation for her informant work. They argued that the 3 men who testified against her were the real killers, that they used Linda as a scapegoat to avoid the death penalty themselves. But for Joana Rodriguez's family, these appeals and controversies represent a painful prolonging of their grief. They lost a daughter and sister to a crime that was planned and executed with stunning cruelty. Baby Ray, now grown, has had to live with the knowledge that his mother was murdered so that someone could steal him as an infant.